Here's your Friday evening internet weather update on the tropics. I'm Chief Meteorologist Alan Seals, and there are active storms, 3 hurricanes, 2 of them Category 4, 1 of them a Category 2. Jose, which a lot of folks may not be focusing on, it's actually approaching the same islands that Irma hit just a few days ago. Winds of 150 miles an hour. It is a high Category 4, and keep in mind, to become a Cat 5, the winds would just have to go up 7 miles an hour. Either way, you clearly can see the eye of Hurricane Jose, a powerful storm that will brush islands like Anguilla, perhaps Barbuda. Again, they were directly hit by Irma not too long ago, and then turn more to the northwest into the central Atlantic, only slowly losing strength, but literally lingering there perhaps for up to a week. Now look at that picture. That's not Jose. That was on Tuesday. That was Irma. And look where it went. Right across Barbuda, Anguilla, the British Virgin Islands, and then north of Puerto Rico, now on the coast of Cuba, and right behind it, that one is Jose. And look at the 2 storms. They're both Category 4s. They both have the same wind speed, but they have different shapes in the clouds. So the clouds don't always show you what the maximum wind speed is. And it turns out the core of the wind in Hurricane Jose is about half of the size of the core of the wind in Hurricane Irma. Go into the Gulf of Mexico. There's Hurricane Katia just about to make landfall, so that will move ashore tonight as a moderate hurricane, also as a rainmaker. So the coast of Mexico and then the mountains are going to get rain. The coast gets the storm surge, and then that system slowly weakens in the near future. So now Irma's the storm that people are talking about. The eye wall is right on the northern coast of Cuba. It's moving westward at 12. Now, the last couple of days, it was moving west-northwest. Now, it's not unusual for it to just sort of change direction a little bit. You'll note the winds, 155 miles an hour, 2 miles difference between a Category 4 and a Category 5 in this case. But at the rate that it's moving, the coast of Cuba is being impacted hard tonight. Many locations will get both sides of the eye wall, and then the rain will be pushed onshore up into the mountains where it comes down and potentially creates mudslides. Now, we don't have a lot of data in that part of the world. In Miami, you've got a northeast wind at 14. Along the north coast of Cuba, a 15-mile-an-hour wind heading southward. But once you get to the central part of the island, winds are about 44 miles an hour. We never truly know what the exact wind is typically, but you can estimate it, and that's what you hear so often. They're the multiple computer forecasts, all of them very consistent and taking this thing across the Florida Keys, up through northern Florida, right along the peninsula, through Georgia into Tennessee. Now, that's the path for the center. It doesn't tell you anything about the wind speed. So when you talk about the wind speed, we're still looking at a Category 4 or 5, basically tonight into tomorrow, and then approaching South Florida still as a Category 4 likely, making landfall likely on Sunday morning, and then weakening to a tropical system and fading once it gets into the central U.S. But it will still be rain. Now, this projection, computer projection, midday tomorrow, showing it's still right on the northern coast of Cuba. So on the forward side, the winds blow on land. That produces storm surge. It pushes moisture on land or inland, and then that comes out as potentially flooding rain. But on either side of that eye, you get the most intense wind. So the northern coast of Cuba is in the serious path of a serious storm. And then it crosses the Florida Straits, and this projection around sunrise on Sunday, the Florida Keys, South Florida, the Everglades. Note the wind circulation. The east coast of Florida will get a direct impact from the winds coming in from the Atlantic Ocean, carrying a lot of moisture. So heavy rain, 10 to 15 inches perhaps, and then storm surge along the east coast, also storm surge along parts of the west coast as it goes forward. From Sunday morning to Sunday midday, then the west coast picks up that west wind that will push water ashore. And within these bands, the feeder bands, still it could be a very powerful storm. You look at this forecast, and it's Sunday at 7:30. It may not necessarily be right where you see it. You may adjust it 50 or 60 miles to the east or south or north or west, but this is just a rough representation of what the most likely scenario is. The eye wall is the big problem, though. For many people, they may have that eye wall go right over them, which means the most intense part of the hurricane produces winds coming from one direction, and then you get in the calm of the center of the storm, and then the winds shift from the other direction. And many folks who experience the eye wall of an intense hurricane say they will never do it again. It's all about being prepared and being in the best possible shape you can be in. But don't forget those feeder bands. That's what helps to drive the hurricane. Those feeder bands produce intense thunderstorms, and beneath the bands you get the high wind also, and you get the threat of tornadoes. So people who are in between the feeder bands, they often say that hurricane wasn't that bad. But in the eye wall, in the feeder bands, yes, it is very bad. And one of the problems with feeder bands and making a prediction is they can rotate along with the storm. They don't stay in the same place, but when they do stay in the same place, you get intense flooding rains, which is what happened in Hurricane Harvey. So now across South Florida, unlike many parts of the coast, lots of tall buildings, lots of high-rise buildings. And one thing to consider, when you hear the wind speed right now, 150 miles an hour, that's for near the ground. If you're at the top of a 40 or 50-story building, the winds are going to be higher because there's no friction there. The wind's near the ground lower, higher at the top. So people in high-rises have to think about that. And then also consider the fact that the buildings are a barrier. When the wind hits the building, it blows against them, but it also, to get between them, has to speed up all of a sudden. And that creates sort of a suction between tall buildings. We call it an urban canyon. So on one side, the wind pushes into the building. In between the buildings, it pulls the building outward. So on some high-rises, what we may find, the winds get blown in on one side. On the other side, they get pulled outward. And that means if you're in a high-rise during a hurricane, you still want to get to the inside part of your home and just make sure you have a bunker. Be in the best situation you can be. It's hurricane season. We're at the peak of it right now. We're looking at 3 hurricanes, but we still have to get through the end of November, really, before the threat of seeing things like these is all out of our hair. Stay safe, have a plan, do the best you can do. I'm Chief Meteorologist Alan Seals.